Every time you worry, you believe you are taking care of yourself. You are merely rehearsing the pain before it arrives. People spend decades convinced that mentally reviewing the worst-case scenario is a sophisticated form of protection, almost a psychological amulet against chaos. But Carl Jung understood something darker than that. The human mind does not worry to avoid suffering. It worries to keep alive the illusion that it still has control over that which was never in its hands. And while this illusion is active, you pay an invisible tax, your peace, for a debt that never existed. There is a cruel mechanism within the human psyche. It convinces you that feeling anticipatory fear is a sign of responsibility, that losing sleep thinking about what could go wrong is a way of being prepared. But observe coldly what worry actually produces. It does not prevent accidents. It does not pay bills. It does not change the decisions of others. It does not change diagnoses. It only ages you from the inside, while the facts follow their own course, indifferent. The real prison, the one no one notices, was never in the problems that arrive. It is in the fictitious problems you construct, decorate and visit every night like someone visiting an imaginary cemetery. And there you mourn deaths that no one died. Pay attention to this with the detachment of a clinical observer. Worry is never about the future. It is about the inability to tolerate the uncertainty of the present. You do not fear tomorrow. You fear the void that exists right now, inside you, when there is nothing to control. And you fill that void by manufacturing threats. This is not care. It is an addiction, a silent addiction, socially accepted, praised as maturity, but one that slowly corrodes your capacity to exist in peace. And this is where depth psychology begins to discomfort. You do not worry because things are grave. You worry because, inside you, calm has become unbearable. And so we come to the second mechanism, even more uncomfortable. Worry, when repeated for years, ceases to be a thought and becomes an internal chemical dependency. The brain reacts to imagined scenarios exactly as it would react to real danger. The heart accelerates, the stomach contracts, the shoulders lock, breathing shortens, and yet nothing has happened. Nothing, except a mental scene. This is what Jung would call unconscious possession. A buried part of your psyche begins to govern your body while you believe you are merely thinking. You are not thinking. You are being thought by something you have not yet managed to integrate. And the most perverse part is that this anxiety gives a false sense of action. You feel productive while ruminating. You feel you are resolving when you are merely spinning. It is the same movement as someone pedaling a stationary bike, a lot of effort, a lot of sweat, and no real displacement. Rumination is the stationary bike of the soul. It exhausts without leading anywhere, and after years in this movement, the body collapses. Insomnia, gastritis, chronic tension, exhaustion with no apparent cause. Not because life became too heavy, but because you learned to carry a weight that never needed to exist. And you carried it for so long that you came to believe that weight was you. That is why I prepared the Código de Despertar for you. It is not a motivational course. It is not a collection of pretty phrases to glue to the wall. It is an internal map built upon the psychology of Carl Jung for those who have already realized that constant worry is not lucidity. It is a sophisticated mask of imprisonment. There are 60 days of daily lessons with specific keys, questions that ache in the right place, and declarations that reorganize your interior. You read, execute the micro-action of that day, and record what moved inside. Step by step, you stop being managed by anxiety and begin to walk toward individuation, the process of becoming finally who you always were beneath the masks. The access is in the first pinned comment of this video. If something inside you recognizes this truth, write in the comments, "I am ready to let go." This small gesture is the first psychological contract you sign with yourself. And it is necessary to separate two things that almost everyone confuses. There is planning, and there is fearing with the aesthetics of planning. They are not the same thing. Planning has an end. You define a problem, examine the variables, decide on an action, and close the thought. The mind rests because the task was fulfilled. Worry, on the contrary, is a thought that refuses to end. It returns to the same point, repeats the same scenario, revisits the same doubt, like a dog biting its own tail. It is not analysis, it is repetition. And repetition without action is the trademark of fear dressed up as intelligence. Have you ever noticed how people who worry too much rarely solve the problems they worry about? They spin them, pollute them, inflate them, but rarely face them. This is not laziness. It is a refined defense mechanism. While you are worried, you have the feeling of doing something. And this feeling relieves the guilt of not acting. That is why worry is so addictive. It offers the moral comfort of action without the real risk of action. You exhaust yourself as if you were working, but nothing changes in the external world. Only your internal wear changes. And over time, you begin to confuse this wear with effort. You start to believe that being destroyed inside is a sign that you are trying. You are not. You are just spinning inside a cage built by your own thoughts. The psychologically mature adult has a very specific, almost silent internal phrase. What I can do now, I do. What I cannot, I let go. Simple as that. Cold as that. There is no drama. There is no aesthetic rumination. There is no ritual of suffering beforehand to deserve being at peace afterward. He acts when he can act and releases when there is nothing to be done. Most people, however, do the opposite. They suffer before they need to suffer. They suffer during what they are already suffering. And they continue to suffer after the problem has passed, mentally reliving the episode. This is not sensitivity. It is conditioning. And conditioning can be undone. Here, depth psychology asks a wounding question. Why can't you let go? The answer is harsh. Because you built an identity around anxiety. And abandoning worry for many people is like losing a piece of themselves. You learned, at some point in your history, that worrying means caring. That being always on alert means being responsible. That sleeping poorly because of others means loving deeply. That carrying the weight of the world on your back means being someone reliable. And, when these equations settled in, calm became betrayal. You started to feel guilt when you were well. You started to distrust lightness. You started to sabotage yourself as soon as peace appeared, because peace did not match the image you have of yourself. This is what Jung would call identification with a mask, the persona. And the persona here is that of the permanent watchman, the person who needs to carry everything, the one who cannot fail, the one who needs to anticipate everything so no one suffers. Beneath this persona, there is almost always a child who learned too early that they were only loved when they were useful, that they only received attention when they were resolving, that they were only worth something when they were sacrificing themselves. And that child grew up confusing love with overload, grew up associating rest with abandonment, grew up believing that existing without being worried was existing without purpose. That is why letting go hurts. Because letting go means demolishing an identity that was built for you to be accepted. And demolishing an identity is always a small morning, all. But the exhaustion you feel after an entire day worrying about people, projects, and possibilities is not physical tiredness. It is the exhaustion of performing a hyper-vigilant version of yourself to keep others comfortable and to keep your own image intact. It is the exhaustion of a mask that became too large, a mask that became armor, and the armor became a prison. And the most terrifying thing about this prison is that the door has been open for years. It is you who no longer believes you can leave. And what you buried to fit into this mask, your spontaneity, your lightness, your right to not be available all the time, did not die. Buried things never die. They simply leak. In the form of anxiety, in the form of inexplicable irritation, in the form of that tightness in the chest that appears out of nowhere when you finally sit down to rest. And it is exactly at this point that the Código do Despertar enters as a surgical tool, not as consolation, as a scalpel. Each of the 60 lessons was designed to dismantle this anxious identity in layers, without haste, without violence, but without anesthesia. The access is in the first pinned comment. If you have made it this far, it is because a part of you has already understood that continuing like this costs too much. Do not let this perception grow cold. It is rare. Now imagine just for a moment what happens inside you when the worry stops. Not when the problems disappear, that will never happen, but when the worry, that mental background noise, falls silent. The first thing that returns is energy. An energy that was hijacked every day to feed scenarios that did not exist. You begin to truly sleep. Food starts to have flavor again. Conversations regain depth because half of your mind is no longer elsewhere, rehearsing catastrophes. The second thing that returns is perception. You begin to notice things that had been there for years. The light of an afternoon, the tone of voice of someone who loves you, details of decisions that needed to be made and that you could not see because you were distracted by the internal noise. And the third thing, the most interesting, is discernment. You begin to distinguish with surgical clarity what is a real threat and what is noise. Your reading of the world sharpens. You stop reacting to everything with the same intensity, and you begin to see with a serene coldness which people truly deserve your attention, which projects deserve your energy, which decisions deserve your weight. Opportunities do not appear out of nowhere. They were already there. It is just that now, without the filter of fear, you can finally see them. Life does not change. You are the one who starts to be present for it. And existing present is the closest a human being gets to being free. But none of this happens while you demand a guarantee from the universe. Here is the most uncomfortable truth of this entire conversation. You will never have absolute control over what comes. Never. Not because the world is cruel, but because that is the architecture of existence. And excessive worry at its core is an infantile attempt to renegotiate this clause of the contract. It is the mind stamping its foot, demanding predictability in a system that never promised to be predictable. And the result of this demand is suffering, a useless, continuous, self-inflicted suffering disguised as responsibility. What Jung would call individuation begins exactly where this demand ends. It begins the moment you look inside and admit, with a rare kind of honesty, I do not know what is coming. And even so, I trust in my capacity to face whatever comes, not because you are certain of winning, but because you have already survived things you swore you could not endure, and each of those survivals, if you look calmly, was building inside you a kind of silent core, a center that does not easily shake. People confuse this center with strength. It is not strength. It is intimacy with oneself. It is knowing in your bones that there is someone reliable on the inside. And this trust, when it finally settles, dissolves the need for worry, because worry has always been a symptom of distrust in oneself. And this is one of the harshest inversions that depth psychology offers. You do not worry because life is dangerous. You worry because, deep down, you do not believe you are capable. You do not trust how you will respond. You do not trust who you will be under pressure. And to compensate for this distrust, you try to control the external world. But the problem was never out there. It was, as it always is, in your relationship with yourself. Rebuilding this trust is not motivational. It is structural. It requires facing day after day the small situations that appear, acting with what you have, reaping the result without drama, and observing, almost clinically, that you survived again, and again, and again, until a sober peace begins to occupy the place where panic once lived. But none of this happens if you continue inhabiting the only place where worry is possible, the imaginary future. The greatest loss caused by chronic anxiety is not sleep, it is not health, it is not energy, it is the present. It is your own life happening while you are somewhere else, mentally, reliving an event that might never happen. You did not lose those years to problems. You lost those years to fictitious problems, and no one gives back time. No therapy, no book, no spiritual awakening gives back the birthdays where you were present in body and absent in soul. No reunion gives back the conversations where you were miles away mentally from the person in front of you. This is the price no one puts on the bill, the real life that passed while you lived inside your head. Ancient wisdom, and Jung recognized this very clearly, is an almost technical skill. Recognize what is under your control, act upon it with precision, and let go of the rest. Not as resignation, as strategy. You do not let go because you gave up. You let go because you understood that holding on changes nothing other than destroying you. And this surrender is not weakness. It is the highest form of emotional intelligence. It is the inner adult, finally formed, telling the inner child that they can rest, that they no longer need to watch over the whole world to feel safe, that now there is someone inside them taking care, and that someone is you. And it is exactly upon this reconstruction that the Código do Despertar was architected. 60 days, one lesson per day, a key, a question, and a declaration, followed by a micro-action and a journal entry. It is not fast. It is not magic. It is precise. Each day demolishes with a scalpel a layer of the anxious structure that you took decades to build. The access is in the first pinned comment, and if you are still procrastinating, understand that procrastinating is not neutral. Every day you keep this old identity alive is one day less of real life. The choice remains yours. But the illusion that you have infinite time to choose is precisely one of the traps of the worried mind. And then we come to the paradox that closes everything. People think that if they stop worrying, they will become cold, distracted, negligent. It is the opposite. When you stop worrying excessively, you do not become indifferent. You become, for the first time, truly effective. Because action without fear is clean action. It is action that sees the situation as it is, and not as panic would like it to be. Your decisions become more precise. Your conversations become deeper, because you are whole in them. Your relationships become more real, because you are no longer projecting threats into every silence from another. And the strangest thing, things start to work out, not because the universe started to collaborate, but because you stopped sabotaging every opportunity with the filter of fear. This is the internal silence that the ancients called wisdom. It is not the absence of problems. It is the presence of someone inside you who no longer feels threatened by them. It is the end of that constant feeling that something terrible is about to happen. It is the discovery that calm was never a luxury. It was always your natural condition, merely hijacked, for decades, by a mind trained to survive and never to live. You can close this video now and return tomorrow to the same cycle. Wake up tired before even starting. Mentally rehearse scenarios that might never arrive. Lose another day inside your own head while real life happens on the outside. You can continue honoring this old anxious identity as if it were who you are, or you can accept, with the coldness that truth demands, that this identity was never you. It was just a survival strategy that stayed in command for too long. The guide is in the first pinned comment. The choice is not between acting now or acting later. The choice is between continuing to be managed by fear or finally beginning to exist. The illusion is over. Decide.